Hey, good evening, welcome. Hey everyone. I have shared it to Ronnie and Roger, but I was about a minute late. I got distracted making the new background. Even though it cuts the top off. Never mind. Ronnie's here. Turn that down a little bit.
Hello.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm fine, yes. It's unusual for me to be here before
Well, that's
Roger.
what I was about to say. I don't think you've ever beat Roger before. Let's
No,
let's
no,
look that in his face when he finally shows up.
yeah.
Yeah, how are you? Good.
yeah, doing okay. Did a bit of more door dropping today.
Oh, good.
Uh,
I did some the weekend and last weekend.
yes, yeah. I've started on because I'm the village where I live. I'm in the process of delivering to all the houses here, all the residences, which I've done several times already over the past probably a couple of years. And I'm on the kind of big houses now where you have to walk about. Some of them they don't put boxes at the top of their drive, so you have to walk about half a mile down the
That's the same as some
drive.
of the areas I've been doing. They've got like
Yeah,
huge driveways, or some of them have got big gates as well.
yeah. Some have got gates that are locked, and you think, well, how does the
Yeah, how's
postie
the
manage
postman get
to?
in? Yeah, he must have a buzzer or something.
Oh, I really don't know. I just, yeah.
But on
So
that note, very interestingly, although it's nothing special, about a month ago, I had an email or like a contact request come through the website. And when I saw the guy's details, it was an area Droitwich that I'd flyered, I don't know, about a month before that. So like it was almost
ah,
like, okay, I know how you found out about the website.
yeah, I mean, that's good. It's great when you get feedback because, like, most of you kind of don't because when when you sort of realise that sort of like sadly most vegans aren't active; they're just quietly vegan, aren't they? That
Yes.
if somebody you turn someone vegan and they become one of those vegans, which is like the vast majority, sadly, I say, because I'd like them to be all active, then you're never going to know about those people. You're only going to know about the active ones. I know that I turned like someone else in our village became an activist after I delivered the leaflets to her. Well, she and her daughter became activists, and the other members of her family became vegan. But I only knew about her because she became active. Otherwise, I wouldn't have known. And I wonder how many others have gone quietly vegan.
Yeah, and you made the point a couple of times in the past as well, but I think it always needs to be reiterated that once upon a time, flyers were the only way people got this information.
Oh, they were. I still think they're a valuable way of
Yeah,
spreading
absolutely.
information. I mean, there's loads of other ways, and I think it's good that there's loads of others because for two reasons. First of all, certain forms of information appeal more to certain people. Some people get a kind of, video might make more of an impact than a flyer on certain people, for instance. But I think because we need to repeat the message, someone need to have the message repeated to them several times before they take notice. It's good to have all these different forms of spreading it, and I think leaflets, flyers are important, and they're kind of quite handy because I had kind of hour to spare,
Yeah.
and so I had to time myself because I had to be back by a certain time, and so I thought, right, I'll go out for an hour and do some delivering, and that's kind of it's a form of activism that you can do like that you can sort of fit into small amounts of your spare time. Whereas if you're doing an information stall or something like that, it's done at a certain time. It's going to
Yeah.
be several hours, and there's all that, you see. So it's not nearly as flexible.
Well, the thing that I always think about as well is like to take like someone like my mum and dad, for example. So they've both got access to the internet, but unless it's me, they're never going to come across this information. because they're never going to come across someone that's going to share it on like, oh, they neither of them use social media for a start. So they're not going
Yeah.
to find it randomly on their YouTube or any of this sort of stuff. So without them getting a flyer or something like that, they wouldn't receive that information even in 2024.
It's very rare. There's a guy I spoke to once who became vegan because he was bored one night and he was like scrolling through YouTube and he came across a video that caused him to go vegan. That's the only person I know who's kind of um, received information randomly. It's usually because they've been guided, and usually people get guided to to videos by quite often it's by printing information, isn't it? That's what they receive first of all.
Yeah, that's
Um,
that's what got me on the route to going vegetarian was a video that I saw pop up on my news feed. I can't even remember who shared it now. I think it might have even been, like just someone random that was sharing like an RSPCA video or something along those lines. But it was just the
yeah,
first time that I actually saw this, like right in front of me. I
I
didn't go
think that's
looking for it. I was just scrolling and it was there.
yeah with social media, of
And if
course.
you remember, I don't know if they still do it because I don't use Facebook anymore, but once upon a time, like the old Facebook app used to, as soon as you'd scroll past a video, it would automatically start playing.
I can't. I don't know whether that's still. I've got a feeling that might still do that. I don't.
But yeah, that's how I went vegetarian. I
Yeah,
was just scrolling randomly one afternoon and watched this video and started watching it, and it was all about chicken farming, and I was just like, "What the hell am I doing?" But yeah,
yeah.
so someone on my news feed or someone that I was connected with obviously shared that for me to see it, but I wouldn't have found it otherwise.
No, I mean one of the things we do locally, we don't do it so much now. We did it a lot more. We started doing it during the lockdown because we couldn't get out there and do stalls and do door dropping and stuff. And one of the things we started doing was doing advertising on social media, Facebook and Instagram, which is the same thing because they're owned by the same company, and you kind of just pay once to have it on both, if you see what I mean. And it
Yeah,
kind of does cost a bit of money, but we were doing like short videos to try and get people to look at websites that promoted veganism, and I thought it was really successful because you get feedback on the number of people that visit the websites, and yeah, it's I thought it was good value for money, and we still do it occasionally, perhaps maybe once a month now, once every 2 months, not as much now as we did in lockdown because we can get out there now. But that's that, but that would have the same effect, somebody because we target it to the local area, and of course that just goes on people's news feeds locally,
yeah,
and that'd have the same effect.
yeah.
And it's I think it's another very effective way of spreading the message. It's complicated. It's quite complicated to set up. If you just want to advertise, if you're selling a product and you want to advertise on Facebook, it's really straightforward. But if you're promoting an issue that's kind of where you want social or political change or something like that, you have to go through this whole rigmarole of getting verified before you can do it,
Right.
and you have to send in like I have to send a scan of my driving license, and I have a letter come to my address and with a code I have to type in, and also it's quite complicated. Once it's set up, it's not too bad, but it was quite complicated to start with.
Fair enough.
It's a hard life.
Yes. Anyway, we better carry on our discussion about the history now that Roger's here.
Yeah.
I mean, now that Roger's here, he's been here for 10 minutes.
Yeah, I
I was
know.
going to say,
But
that's the first time we got to speak, isn't it?
we were warming up. Andy and I were warming up, weren't we, Andy?
I'm used to not speaking when Ronnie's around.
Yeah.
Well, if you want, and you can introduce us to where we're at.
Okay, we're up to Leslie Cross really, and starting with a remarkable thing that was I don't know when it was written or even delivered, but it was published in 1948, and it's interesting because we were talking about this before, Andy, about the fact that the only thing that seemed to have survived is the second part of it,
Yeah.
because Leslie Cross
Well,
often,
and even then, an extract of the second part.
an extract
Yeah.
of the second part. Yeah. Now we think that Donald Watson spoke at this same meeting. It was a Society of Friends, right? And the title is Animal Emancipation Related to Human Progress. So that's a kind of typical Leslie Cross theme. But also, he talks about broad aspects of veganism a few times, or at least twice. And he does so in this as well. One thing that's remarkable about this, I think, is the fact that this is a talk given, a local kind of town hall, and yet you can't imagine something as involved as this, with lots of references ever being given nowadays, because again, just the way they didn't write in sound bites, they didn't deliver a talk in sound bites either. So again, it's one of those things where you've got to read all of it to really get what's going on.
Yeah.
Which is pretty good. So he starts off with the second broad aspect. He said, let us consider the second broad aspect of humanity's relationship with the world of our fellow animals, the aspect by which man affects himself. So obviously that's the kind of language of the time. Now, essentially, he's talking about a kind of a vicious circle, really, because the language is really interesting. And I think Watson was the same with this. He talked about humans being parasites on the non-human world, right? And he says that because we're parasites on the non-human world, it affects our moral development. And then it doesn't do us any good, either physically or morally. And so therefore, we become even worse. So we become worse parasites, and we do things which are even more vicious, and so it goes around in a bit of a vicious circle. That's what he starts off by saying, which is quite interesting.
I think what he didn't realise as well is that by farming and obviously killing all these animals, that we're actually endangering our own very existence on this planet, because of the huge contribution that animal farming, and also to a certain extent the fishing industry as well, makes towards the climate crisis. It's absolutely huge. I mean, it's been estimated by one, by one study to be as high as 87% responsible for the climate crisis. For global
Yeah, I think the other key one that I guess it wasn't a factor at all really when this was written, would have been antibiotic resistance too.
Yes, absolutely. There's far more antibiotics used on farmed animals, aren't there, than on humans, and of course people are consuming that flesh that the antibiotics have been used on, and also those antibiotics are going into the water system, aren't they? They're going into the rivers and into the sea and everywhere, and so there's all that as well.
Yeah, I mean that's a real serious threat even to vegans.
Yeah, so I mean, although the pioneers of veganism didn't realise that, there's a much more direct threat to the very survival of humans on this planet, through the fact that we consume animal products, or most do. I mean, obviously we three don't, but sadly a lot of other people do.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, some of these things are still, I mean, even climate change, for example, like that still threatens us, right? Antibiotic resistance still threatens us.
It threatens us. It's and although we're not part of it, it's still it endangers everybody. And like George Monbiot, the well-known environmentalist I'm always talking about, and he said that the two most important things that anyone can do in their everyday life to combat the climate crisis is one, to adopt a vegan friendly diet, and two, to avoid flying in airplanes.
The first thing is surely to accept that it's happening in the first place.
Well, except it's happening, and of course, a lot of people deny it because, and the reason I think people deny the climate crisis is because people are afraid of change, and people don't want the change that we'd have to make in order to effectively combat the climate crisis. So people will resist change, and anything that they can grab onto, so as to continue living like they always have lived, they'll grasp.
Yeah. Well, here's a question for both of you then, because given what you've just said about antibiotics and all that, I mean, we've actually thrown shite at the earth for lots of years now, since the Industrial Revolution in particular, right? And so, in some senses, we're talking about a testament to the fact that the kind of planet's healing capacity is very good. But that leads people to think that we can't damage it, even if we tried. And so, therefore, you don't have to do anything, right?
But it's starting to break down now. This is the problem. It's starting to break down. The ecosystems are starting to break down, and in the end, that's going to cause even the destruction of our own species, because it's
Yeah,
just
and I mean it's the speed of time as well, isn't it? Like obviously our planet potentially has gone through far worse than anything that we're currently throwing at it in the past. But it happened over a huge period of time. Whereas this rate that we're throwing this stuff at it increases every single day. And there isn't a
yes,
period of healing. There isn't like a respite period where I mean
yeah.
the closest we had to that was lockdown, and we saw natural progression outside, which has all gone away again now.
Well, there was a massive reduction in pollution. Some cities that have had, suffered from severe pollution. I think there was an example of was it Mumbai in India was one of them,
Yeah,
where the sky was always clouded with pollution and then it was absolutely clear.
yeah, yeah.
During the lockdown, and I mean, I think the lockdown there were kind of positives and negatives of the lockdown, but certainly one of the positives was that there was a reduction in
Well,
pollution.
won't some people take that as a message saying we don't have to stop, we just have to stop now and again?
No,
Well,
it
no,
didn't
well,
change
it's
anything,
not
did
enough
it? I
because
mean, it was just the fact that people weren't flying and stuff. They were
Yeah,
still
that's what I mean.
consuming
If we
animals.
stop doing that every now and again.
but everything goes back. Everything goes back. That was just an example of kind of how it can, But as soon as everything starts up again, it kind of goes back to what it was, and which is what's happened.
Yeah, and most of these sort of like places that we're talking about as well, like the pollution that's coming from animal agriculture, or the pollution that comes, or slurry that comes from these places, that's not in the cities. That's not where people would have witnessed these changes anyway. These are like far away out of view. So people might have noticed that the sky cleared in London or in some other city because it's usually full of smog. But that's not being
Yes.
caused for the most part by animal agriculture. That may be caused by the airport. So the fact that people aren't
Yeah.
flying as often, there's a direct effect where you won't see what's happening in the countryside because most people don't live there.
Yeah, there's a huge amount of air pollution caused by animal agriculture, and in fact, the major cause. I mean, we often hear, like here in the UK, there's huge concern about sewage in the rivers, because the water companies aren't doing their job properly, because they're private companies and they operate primarily for profit. They cut corners, and so it's ended up with, like, they're not properly preventing sewage from going in the rivers, and so our rivers are polluted by, like, humans sewage, and everyone's, like, quite rightly up in arms about that, and calling for these companies to be brought back into public ownership, where they'd be subject to greater control and wouldn't operate for profit. But a far greater cause, and this is according to, like, a government survey, government report, that the greatest cause of river pollution isn't kind of human sewage; it's animal agriculture. Animal agriculture is the biggest cause of um, pollution in our rivers. Um, not human sewage. So if we want to stop the rivers being polluted and all the life in the rivers being killed, then stop consuming animal products.
Well, should we get back to Cross?
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, well, I mean, obviously, they talk quite a lot about evolution in their writing, and in particular, the moral evolution. So he uses an interesting phrase. He says that by acting as kind of parasites on the non-human world, we kind of create an anchor which weighs us down. And he says, in that sense, we're doing ourselves a great deal of damage. It means we're held down from our moral elevation, essentially. And he says, in particular, we can think of, that's in relation to just everybody, but in particular, you can think of people who work in houses of slaughter. And he said, those people are kind of weighed down as though they've got chains around them because of what they do, which is kind of even worse, if you like. And in this talk, he references about three or four different things. which is interesting. The first one, he talks about the Chicago slaughterhouses, he calls it the shambles, and I think is referring to the jungle, which is a famous thing by Upton Sinclair in there. And again, it's this thing about how by working in the slaughterhouse, these people kind of lose their humanity completely. And there is some research that suggests that in areas where a lot of the employment is to do with slaughterhouses, incidents of domestic violence are higher and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And the studies that now back that kind of information up.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to become hardened, don't you, in order to do that job? But the only reason that there'll be people saying, well, how could anyone work in a slaughterhouse? I can never work in a slaughterhouse. How terrible! What a terrible job. The only reason those people work in slaughterhouses is because people consume animal products and are paid in the wages of those people that work in a slaughterhouse, aren't they? That's the only reason why those
there's a couple of things to say. First of all, how can anybody work in a slaughterhouse? A lot of people can't, and so that means the staff turnover.
That's a really key point. Their staff turnover is probably about 15% long term, and everyone else is temporary or lasts X amount of time. Huge amounts of agency workers get put in slaughterhouses,
and obviously, tragically, a huge amount of immigrant workers, either legally or illegally. So,
well, I suppose because they're desperate for work, so they'll take.
So it's kind of it's poverty creating that problem.
For the most part, we're talking about exploitation on top of exploitation.
Yeah, it's interesting that, though, isn't it? From people who are kind of opposed to immigration. Oh, these people come over here and take our jobs. They actually usually end up in jobs that these people don't want to take in the first place.
People don't want to do.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. That's a pretty common thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and just to summarise that, I mean, it's only a sentence, isn't it? But it has been said by witnesses that in the shambles of Chicago, it is difficult to believe that the people whose daily work is perpetual killing have the spark of humanity left within them. And I mean, if you're doing something every day that desensitizes you, you do lose your kind of connection with these things. Not just obviously you're desensitized to the taking of lives of animals, but you're desensitized to pain, you're desensitized to empathy, to emotion, to how others might feel.
Yeah, but it's kind of like a defense mechanism. You've kind of got to do it.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's the only way to cope, I would imagine.
I always remember, because we published a video of artificial insemination in Ireland, and there's this guy whose job is to lead bulls to another bull called a teaser bull, and get one bull to mount the other, and then he rushes in with an artificial vagina in order to collect the semen. I always think, can you imagine he goes back home and what have you been doing all day, Daddy, kind of thing. But on the serious note, it's kind of like that. I've been killing all day because I work in a slaughterhouse. I mean, it's a bizarre job in a way.
I suppose. I mean, I don't know anyone close enough to have ever been in that association, but I would imagine the family members and those close to those people too just don't ask too many questions. Why would they? I would imagine they don't want to know.
Or if they do, they might not get many answers.
Yeah. Or they get very vague answers. Yeah, we harvest animals at work.
I mean, I remember my dad telling me that he worked on a guidance system for nuclear weapons.
Wow.
I was absolutely horrified. I said, why'd you do that? And he kind of said, because the Russians, any moment now, a nuclear weapon could come from Russia, but we have to have our own.
Yeah, somebody's got to do it, Ronnie.
It made me terrified. I was absolutely terrified. I was looking up in the sky for like a rocket coming over and that, But I was horrified that he had that job. But thankfully, he went and worked somewhere else eventually, and went and worked on, in a computer place instead, But that was so it would be horrifying, wouldn't it, for someone's children to find out they worked in a slaughterhouse, I'd imagine.
Yeah, Cross goes on to talk about heavy protein, as he calls it, and he said that heavy protein is going to be a source of trouble, as he puts it, right?
I've always, and again, I could be wrong and feel free to disagree, but I've always sort of interpreted heavy protein to mean animal protein.
Yeah, that's what he meant, and
Yeah.
also things like calf food, milk and
Yeah.
yeah, that's what he meant, and so again, you see, he's always argued that morally we damage ourselves and physically we damage ourselves by doing the same thing, which is being this parasite on other animals. It's not a great thing to do. And then he moves on to talk about the issue of terror, and you get a lot of people saying that in the modern day as well. My food doesn't scream and this kind of stuff. And he's basically kind of saying, what are the effects of eating terrified individuals, who meet their death and they're absolutely terrified. And of course, in the modern day, we've got a few slaughterhouse workers now who kind of quite openly admit that other animals will start crying and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And they resist the idea of, you're putting human emotions on the animals, and they resist that. They say, look, I've seen it, mate, kind of thing. Don't tell me I'm doing that. I've watched that, and they're shivering with fear, and they start to weep, right? And
and I mean, what those people are doing is misappropriating mammal emotions and saying that only humans can feel them.
Yeah, that's a really good
thing.
point. Yeah, that's right. We're the only mammals who can do that. That's right. Yeah. Again, that is part and parcel of the disconnect for most humans, that they don't regard themselves as animals in the same way as we don't tend to identify as apes, and mammals. Indeed, we don't tend to identify as mammals, which has always baffled me when women don't identify as mammals. On the grounds of, well, mammary glands, and then the idea that they don't go on to then make the association with dairy is a bit of a baffle to me. It's not an excuse, but it's almost more excusable that men don't understand that, right? Than women, because they.
I suppose it all just falls back into that sheer disconnection, though. Because I mean, I still have conversations with people most days where they're offended by the idea of being an animal.
Yeah.
Like it actively offends them, even the thought of it, let alone making that kind of bridge. So yeah, I think it all just plays back into that disconnection of, well, that's a cow and I'm a female, I'm a woman.
But I'd say, well, then what are you? Are you animal, vegetable, or mineral? Which of the three are you?
Well, they'd say we're none of those. We're human. That's what they'd say.
Yeah, I know. It's. I mean, it is ridiculous, but it's it's the way people have brought up, and this is human supremacism, and this is the fundamental problem that underlies the reason why other animals are oppressed by humans. The fact that humans, through their arrogance, consider themselves superior to other animals, when there's no moral or rational justification for that belief at all.
Yeah, absolutely. Cross goes on to talk about violence. Now, this is something we could have used yesterday, actually, Ronnie. Ronnie and I did a YouTube event that we do called Still Alive, and it was about vegans and war. And he talks about how it all boils down to violence. And he says the culminating peak of violence is war, right? And so that's an interesting one, that yet another one of the vegan pioneers talked about warfare. But he also says that waging war on each other is bad enough. But what about the kind of moral implications of waging war on the defenseless? And he kind of implies it's worse to do that, almost as though, well, if you're an army attacking another army, then they can fight back. Whereas, in terms of what we do to our fellow animals, they can't fight back, or they can't fight back very well, or they only can fight back as individuals sometimes. And it almost is an interesting commentary on Palestine as well, because there you've got something that is described as a war, and you get one side who are a nuclear power versus another side who are using little handmade rockets and rocks and stuff.
Yeah.
Well, of course, it's the civilian casualties there, you see, isn't a case of kind of one army, combatants, the people that are in the armies killing one another. The vast majority of of victims there are just ordinary civilians, and an even greater number of victims amongst other animals. I think warfare now with using high explosives, there are far more non-human animals killed than humans as a result of that as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Not just in the initial impacts or blast radiuses, but think of like the huge lands that once upon a time provided food or shelter that are now no longer usable for however many years afterwards.
Yeah, there's interesting layers of speciesism, as we discussed yesterday. For example, sometimes you'll get reports about warfare, and no one was hurt, which meant no human being was hurt. And then you've also got this big divide within the animal kingdoms, so-called, right? Because as you kept pointing out, Ronnie, all the figures about our fellow animals killed in warfare don't include beings such as rats and mice and pigeons, etc. It's usually they're like privileged species, so they're looking at horses, and donkeys, etc. So that's all almost a kind of speciesism within speciesism going on.
Yeah,
it's animals that are somehow regarded as of use to humans. They talk about dogs and cats, people having their homes. They talk about farmed animals, and they'll talk about some of the more iconic species of large animals that are,
it boils down to property at the end of the day, doesn't it? Yeah. All of those other animals that would have been included would have been someone's quote unquote property.
For a large part of it, yes, they would.
Yeah. Well, that's borne out by the coverage, because they talk about animal companions. They talk about animals in zoos. They talk about people's horses who they've had to leave and this kind of stuff. So it's very much tied up with that kind of.
Yeah, and again, to go back to Palestine, we've seen that more recently there, where animals in zoos are starving and they're given like news coverage and there's GoFundMe's and things for them. But what about the free living beings that are not even considered?
That'll be the vast majority of other animal victims will be the free living beings.
Of course, yeah.
Birds.
The ones that aren't considered property are usually the biggest victims in terms of numbers. Yeah, not just in terms of, like I say, the direct hits and the actual violence there and then, but the aftermaths too. I mean, who's going to take the injured wildlife to the vets? Nobody. Yeah. At least if you put a dog out the rubble, there's a good chance they're going to get some treatment.
That's right, and of course fishes as well, because around this a war zone, the waters around there are going to be affected. They're going to become
absolutely,
and all that. And then there's the effect, the effect on the climate. There was one article we included in our discussion last night that estimated that the wars that are kind of currently going on, and there's quite a number of wars going on at the moment. It's not just the Ukraine and the attacks on Palestine. There are other wars as well. That the contribution of warfare just really recently is 5% pollution to 5% contribution towards the climate crisis. Through the emissions, the fires, and all that caused by warfare. And when you consider the huge number of our fellow animals that are suffering and dying as a result of the climate crisis, when you look at the huge forest fires that have been, I think it's estimated that 3 billion other animals perished in the ones in Australia, and there have been fires in Greece and been fires at other places as well. And that's just that aspect of the climate crisis. That when you think 5% of all those billions, that's a huge number, a huge number of other animals that are victims of human warfare.
Yeah. So war, what is it good for? Absolutely nothing. Now, here's something that you lads are going to find interesting. I don't know whether you saw the reference to Emerson, Andy, and. We're talking about Ralph Waldo Emerson. I don't think it's Emerson, Lake and Palmer by any stretch of imagination. But basically, he's saying something here which is almost verging on intersectionality, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
Because he says the only sin, said Emerson, is limitation. we err, and we err greatly, when we limit the application of abiding principles to one section of the world's inhabitants. So there you are, the idea of kind of bracketing off different forms of injustice is even criticized in this from 1949. So that's pretty interesting. He does go back and then starts talking about our fellow animals. They share with us the habitation of this globe, and he talks about that. And he says that really we have a kinship with them and we can't escape it. And so the more violent we are towards that kinship, again, it's going to rebound on us, which is a theme that Cross wrote about over and over and over again. And I know that there's some vegans who just like to think that this seems to be almost like just an added fringe benefit that he was talking about. I think it's pretty clear from his writing that it was very integral to his position that we're kind of harming everyone. We said yesterday that Donald Watson was a conscientious objector because he didn't want to kill anyone. Well, Cross talks about things in terms of it doesn't want to be unjust against everyone, and he doesn't want to cause any harm to anyone, including humanity. And so it's not just like a fringe thing; it's an integral part of the the scheme of things, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and although he wasn't like a registered CO, I mean, he was a lifelong pacifist. So he
Is
held
this Cross
exactly
or
the
Watson
same
you're talking
opinions
about?
as Donald Watson. He just never officially was a conscientious objector.
Oh, right. This is Cross you're talking about, yeah?
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, I mean, it might be possible, unless John's ever said different. I've never read anything that said he is. And quite a lot of the other ones say we were conscientious objectors during the war. And I've never seen Cross state that. So it's only an assumption.
Yeah. He does talk about the relationship between humanity and nature. And he doesn't seem to be restricting that just to the animal part of it, as it were. So again, that would feed into the early concern about, what we now call environmentalism. I suppose
Yeah.
in their day it was called ecology. So again, he was saying, if we become out of tune with nature, then we're creating a massive problem, which is where we started with climate crisis. We're so out of tune and out of kilter with natural forces and rhythms, if you like, because we impose on the world rhythms, don't we? The 5-day week and the kind of the 8-hour working day and all that. These are human inventions that we've forced the world to abide by, rather than. I mean, I even see that in terms of. I once went to Spain, and that they were still having the siestas and everything, and that to me made complete sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
The fact that wow, this made a lot of sense. Get up early in the morning, do some work before it's getting really hot. When it got really hot, you then kind of rest, and then when it starts to cool down a bit, then you start working again in a lighter kind of way. It's as though they were in tune with the world in a way that I'd not really seen that before.
Yeah.
In terms of what was going on in Britain.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I really like that paragraph in the sphere of positive evidence one. I think it's really telling. And then, like, when you actually kind of read that out, you don't. I don't know. I can't really see how you can interpret it in any other way than what he says. And I mean, we're talking about a man that chose his words very carefully, knew exactly what he was doing, was a journalist.
Okay. Jennifer's asking who is the moderator.
There should be a few in there.
And what was that Daddy Bear then that just popped up?
I don't know. I didn't see that.
Yeah.
They must have been invited by someone. Must have been a mistake.
Okie dokie. Right. So, anything else you picked out about this? Anybody?
There's another part if you go further up that I always think is a bit intersectional as well, where he talks about it's not just the physical aspects that will kind of come anyway. He doesn't want to focus on them too much, which are like the side effects that everyone usually refers to.
Oh yeah, I don't want to divert the attention. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. Yeah, yeah.
Yes, I always think those two particular bits are interesting.
He's kind of saying we're not going to do ourselves any physical favors, but they are kind of almost incidental to the moral harm that we're going to cause to ourselves.
Yeah.
So is the kind of moral harm that was more important for him? Because again, I think he's got things like, you're moving then from thinking about an individual with their health to, the health of generations, kind of psychological kind of thing.
Yeah.
So which kind of makes sense, and it's a bigger view of things as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's only a year later then that we've got the next two essays, which are actually one essay split into two, aren't they? So like it's all being shaped. I don't know when, as you say, we don't know when this talk actually took place. We don't, because obviously it could have been it could have been a year before, it could have been 2 years before. We don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're back to the slowness of it all, and again, I think people in the internet age probably don't appreciate how kind of slow everything was. Plus the fact, of course, we're talking about, we a couple of years after the end of the war.
Yeah.
So, I mean, in fact, somebody said, I was looking at the history, one of the history things, and saying that the travel restrictions of war made it difficult. And that meant that there was restrictions on postage systems and this kind of stuff, and that priorities were given to military things compared with civilian things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, which obviously is just common sense in terms of warfare.
Yeah, and I mean that's the point I tried to make before with the communications that they were having before the Vegan Society was even founded. That the certain mail that just wasn't important enough. Like that stuff just wasn't important enough. If people are going to take risks to do things, it's got to be important messages, and that just wouldn't have been deemed so. So there'd have been a load of time where they possibly wouldn't have been able to communicate with one another. So, like, these are just things that we can't comprehend in this day and age because it's just so easy for us to communicate with anyone, anywhere in the world. But for them, unless you could reach them physically, like walk to them, it might not have been possible to reach these people.
Yeah, you're talking about moving on to In Search of Veganism. Again, that we're talking about 49 here, aren't we?
Yeah, but at least the only reason is we know that those two, or it's actually one essay that's just got split into two different things. They were written for the vegan issue, so we kind of have a little bit of a timeline on that at least.
Yeah, also it fits in with what was going on in the society, in the sense that 1949 was the year that Cross pointed out that there was a definition of the vegan diet, but there was no definition of what veganism was.
Correct, yeah.
And so that's where he begins to do it. So I mean, I don't know whether it worked in a kind of way of kind of he's going, hey, we don't have a good definition of veganism, and all the others said, well, go on then.
Yeah, I always got that impression too. But I always think it's really telling as well that it just shows that even then, in at least 49, maybe even earlier than that, but at least then they were thinking, well, this isn't just a diet, because otherwise there would have been no need to find a definition other than the one that was already established. Their job was done. But it wasn't done because they didn't have a definition for veganism and they strove to make one. Otherwise, just abstaining from eating animal products would have been enough.
Interested in your take on this, Andy, because it was suggested to me on a comment on my YouTube that Watson was a bit of a foodie at first, and then, and so because he was forced to, he had to talk about health and food in the early years because of that thing about everybody's gonna die thing.
Mm-hmm.
Then Cross comes along, and it seems that Cross possibly radicalized Watson And so maybe that is what feeds into Watson being so praising of Cross
I would say
afterwards.
so. Yeah,
Yeah,
I would say that's what the evidence kind of suggests. Definitely, I think that Watson was always kind of ethically there too. Yeah, I would say that his motivations weren't so that he was like a foodie by choice, more so that that was just what the information everyone wanted all the time was. And I suppose for a few years they did need to prove to everyone around them. I mean, look at Ronnie's story from last week about his mum. No, this is all these years later. So I suppose for a while, a good couple of years, they did need to prove to everyone close to them that they weren't going to
yeah.
die
You're
in
I'm trying to
overdosing.
keep you on. Are you still there, Ronnie?
Yes, I was going to say, and because they kind of came out of the vegetarian society, didn't they?
Mm.
That was very much focused on food, wasn't it, and diet. It wasn't really a kind of ethical component to that as
That's a
such.
really good point too. Yeah, I wonder how many of people in the vegetarian society before the vegan society was founded were vegetarian for ethical reasons.
Yeah, well, I mean, just going back to Watson, though, like we were saying about the foodie bit, that's contradicted pretty much by the 1945 thing, isn't it, about
It's
sentient
also
life?
contradicted quite a bit by his various interviews over the years where he talks about like his upbringing and that kind of stuff. Yeah, because I mean, you go back to that story he tells about his childhood where he refers to his uncle and his mate who brings in the gander, and his uncle makes the claim that he doesn't touch meat, he won't kill anyone. Now that's when he's a teenager. So the ethics were there as far as he portrays for a long time before. It wasn't just a food thing. He recognized the moral wrong.
Yeah, yeah. And going back
And I mean, he
to,
was a conscientious objector, like after the First World War, basically. So, like, again, this predates the vegan society. So, yeah, he definitely ethically opposed these things.
yeah, well, I guess that's probably why he was on the kind of radical fringe of vegetarianism, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I would possibly look at it as like that potentially did happen, though. He probably got a bit caught up in the this is what we have to do, and then Cross probably came around and said, "Well, look, we've got people now to focus on the food. Let's start talking about the other stuff."
I think they had a bit of a series of dilemmas, because, I mean, Watson said in the first Vegan News, and that was November 44, that what's going to be our relationship with vegetarians? Because it was an issue. He was kind of aware that veganism was a critique of vegetarianism.
Yeah,
He,
absolutely. Yeah.
he called it a moral halfway house. He even kind of had a bit of a swear word for them. He called them the lactose. And yet at the same time, he said that we need to work with them, or we need to be sympathetic to them, type of thing. And so I think that, going back to Ronnie's point, that this kind of divorce, this separation from the vegetarians was a bit of a shock, because first of all they didn't see it coming. So they had the shock of the Second World War, and then they had the shock of the fact that suddenly they were running a social movement, and none of them had a inkling at all that that was what's going to happen.
Yeah.
It was just like crash landed on their desk, as it were, and they go,
Yeah,
right.
yeah. And I think as well, I would imagine that some of the relationships that were there when they first sort of asked the question, hey, can we have like a sister society within the vegetarian society? And the answer was no, were probably slowly burned as time went on. In the same way that when we spend any time with a non-vegan, they're naturally defensive because you're kind of showing that they're not doing enough. Well, that would have been exactly the same with the vegetarian society. All of a sudden, the vegan society have popped up to say, well, hang on a minute, you're not doing enough. And it's a constant reminder of that.
Yeah, that's interesting, that actually, because I've always assumed that if the vegetarians had said yes, that would have been the end of vegan philosophy. But say if it wasn't, then it means that there would be a hell of a lot of internal pressure created by the fact that, as you say, you've got this faction that, even whether they wanted to or not, looked a little bit holier than thou, and it could have really kind of created a schism within the vegetarian society.
Yeah, I would
So
I would imagine, obviously, just like there always is within these groups, that when they first put that idea out, and especially when they first founded the society, there'd have been members of the vegetarian society that were supportive, and there'd have been some that were drastically opposed.
I mean, well, they were themselves all still members of the vegetarian society, weren't they?
Yep.
And then for
Yep.
many years they gave talks at the International Vegetarian meetings and congresses and stuff. and so it was almost like
But yeah, I
well,
mean, what within the president's address that we read out last week, it says, doesn't it? It's George Henderson's intro, but he says that like some people were really happy with the talk and some people weren't, and I could imagine that that was the case. Yeah, absolutely. Some people would have come to the realization that hang on a minute, they've got a point, and others would have been like, I don't want to change.
I mean, this is interesting because what caused me to become vegan. I was vegetarian, and it was an article in the Vegetarian Society's magazine by somebody from the Vegan Society that caused me to become vegan. So they certainly, you know, were happy for someone from the Vegan Society to have an article in their magazine.
presumably it was all food based, was it, Ronnie? Do you remember?
No, I don't. No, I mean, I remember also there were adverts and maybe articles as well about other aspects, you know, of animal rights. There was stuff about anti-vivisection.
Which makes sense because of
Yeah,
how many people from the Vegan Society continued to do talks for them.
yeah.
I would
So it
imagine there
wasn't
was
just
some, yeah.
it wasn't just about food. I mean, I think, you know, obviously primarily it was, but there was this, and I was horrified because I mean I just knew animals were killed for food, and I didn't want to be part of that, so I was a vegetarian. I kind of wasn't aware of all these. I wasn't aware of what happened to the, you know, to the cows and the calves and the, you know, chicks and the hens or any of these things. And I also wasn't aware of experiments on animals. I wasn't really aware of the fur trade, and you know these other
It's
things.
almost like your Earthlings was in the pages of the Vegetarian Society magazine.
It kind of was. I was kind of horrified. I thought it's far worse than I thought, and that really spurred me to kind of I think kind of become an activist. Not only become a vegan, but also to become an activist. On when I started off with the, you know, in the hunt sabs, you know, to take an action against hunting.
Do you remember what actually kind of, as it were, you didn't become a full on anti-vivisectionist as much as a SAB. So do you know why that choice was made, if it was a choice?
It was what basically what happened was I became vegan. I immediately kind of sent away to the Vegan Society, got information from them, and then I became vegan. Kind of very, you know, changed my diet very, very quickly. I became vegan,
And
and
just to
then
clarify for everybody, we're talking about 1972 here, folks.
1972, yeah, an early 1972, really. It was around early spring of 1972, I think. And then I saw a news item on the television about the hunt sabs. And I thought, right, I've got to get involved in that. I've got to get involved in that. And I think it was that. And I mean, had it been because I suppose I was young and it was an active thing, you know, and that attracted me. I mean, I did get involved in the anti-vivisection movement as well, but the hunt sabs was the first kind of active thing that I got involved. I think it was because it was active and I was only young.
Yeah, can you remember any details? Because there is that scene, really early on scene from the Sabs, where there was, one of the women from the Sabs was being whipped.
Yeah,
Now
it
I
it
don't know whether that was the open door thing later
it
on, or
it,
whether
it,
that
it,
was.
it was a news item about sabs being attacked there at the meat of the hunt, and the hunt people were on their horses and they were whipping the sabs, and that made me very angry. I thought those people are there trying to save the fox, and
Yeah, can you
there's
remember that woman's name? It's Sue something, was it? Sue.
Sue Roberts.
Oh, was
Yeah,
it? Okay.
I'm still friendly with Sue. I still know Sue.
Right.
Um, and yeah, I think it was Sue Roberts, the woman in that particular
'Cause I always remember being really.
video.
She was
I,
being quite small, and she was spraying, and they were just laying into her with whips.
yeah, yeah. I mean, absolutely. But yeah, but you know, if these people pursue and you know and delight in watching a fox torn to pieces, then they're not going to be any different to to a human that can't properly defend themselves, are they? You know, these people are bullies and cowards, really, aren't they? So of course they're going to behave like that. Um, but that I thought these people need help. To they're kind of being attacked and they need help. So that was another thing that really spurred me to join them.
Well, we're coming up to the hour. We've got an interesting conversation about whether Keir Starmer and Sunak are vegetarians in the chat, which is interesting.
I'm not
I
sure
think
about
right.
Keir Starmer. I'm sure that I read before that Sunak was a pescatarian.
Oh,
Yeah,
right,
well,
okay.
so in other
Not that it
words,
means anything at
even
all, but yeah.
in other words, is responsible for killing even more animals than somebody that has just a normal.
He's a pescatarian.
Well, the trouble with pescatarians is that, and I don't know why. I mean, just go vegan. It's easy. You know, why piss about? You know.
Why
Um,
choose the most oppressed species on the planet as well?
well, the thing is, you're killing more animals. Fish are really small, and if you're substituting your meat with fishes, then you're killing more of them, aren't you? Because they're only small. You know, so you're actually it's worse. It's worse to be a pescatarian than to be an ordinary
So
person that
would a
kills animals.
pescatarian have fish flesh every day? Then do you think?
Well, I'd imagine that what they're doing is substituting the farmed animal, the flesh from farmed animals, with flesh from fishes. And so, because fishes are so small, they're going to be a lot more fishes are going to be killed to feed them than previously, aren't they? So it's a retrogressive step in terms of, you know, the number of animals you're responsible for killing, basically. You know, people proudly say, "Oh, I'm a pescatarian, so I'm taking a step in the right direction." No, you're not. No, you're not. You know, I mean, just go vegan. It's like really easy. You know what I mean? I don't really see why people kind of think that there's so much difficulty in it. You know, it's not.
So
No.
they don't want to give up their privilege, basically.
Yeah, well, yeah, but you know, that's. I mean, it's just the pescatarian thing, and it's the same with vegetarian. Really, if what's happening is, and this is kind of in a sense what I did, when I first became a vegetarian because I kind of didn't know. I instead of my meat and also instead of the fish I ate, I was eating eggs or I was eating dairy products. So really, in terms of the number of animals I was responsible for the killing of, it wasn't any less. I don't think it wasn't any less because if I'd been substituting the meat with vegetables, you know, with vegetable protein like beans or pulses or nuts or food made from that, then that would have made a difference. But I didn't. But a lot of that was because it was kind of I suppose still living at home. My mum did the cooking, and so she was substituting. She was substituting the meat and fish with dairy products and eggs.
I'm just
Yeah.
looking back because I saw a really good question very early on, and I'm damned if I can find it now. I should have written it down. Somebody's saying, was it Persona saying, "Silence is violence. Stand up for the voiceless," which is it's a good slogan. Silence is violence in terms of activism and stuff, isn't it?
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
I think if you remain quiet, you're
Silence is consent at the end of the day,
it's
isn't it?
concerned. Yeah, you're kind of you're sort of like going along with the existing system, aren't you? You know, you have to. I mean, you know, like veganism in terms of mere avoidance. In other words, if someone says, "I'm a vegan," I don't consume animal products. I don't go to the zoo. I don't bet on the horses, and it's all about avoidance, avoiding involvement in the exploitation of other animals, right? Then that's to me that's only a neutral position. It's good that they're doing that. It's better than being involved in that, but it's only a neutral position because they're only not doing what they shouldn't be doing anyway. It's like someone saying, it's like someone who is a mugger saying, "Aren't I good? I've given up mugging. Aren't I a wonderful person?" And you go, "Well, hang on a minute. You shouldn't have been mugging in the first place anyway." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Well,
the only
there are some differences, but one question is: do you think it's entirely neutral or somewhat
well,
neutral?
I think it only ceases to become neutral if you kind of educate others. Um,
Yeah,
to
but that
become,
feeds into that joke, doesn't it? How do you know if you're with a vegan? Don't worry, they'll tell you within 10 seconds. So, I mean,
well,
how many silent vegans do you know?
Well, I think it's very hard for, unless someone was like,
It depends how you define that,
depends
though.
how
Because
you.
I mean, someone saying, "Oh, well, I can't have that particular milk because I'm vegan," is very different than someone saying, "Well, what's stopping you from being vegan?" So
Yeah,
I think you do normally find out that someone's vegan because they volunteer it, but quite often that's to avoid something.
yeah. I think really, we have a duty to do our best to spread the vegan message, and obviously, according to different people's personal circumstances, some can do more than others, and I appreciate that. But all of us have spare time. All of us have the capacity to spread the message, and I think it kind of is our duty to do so. The situation for other animals is kind of so horrific, and it's caused by our species that we're members of, that we kind of do have a duty to do our best to educate others to become
Okay, the follow-up question, because we've actually got a question about the RSPCA, but a follow-up question to that is, if I can remember it, what was it? Do you think, I mean, like, in terms of the writing of the pioneers, which is what we're going through, I don't think that implies neutrality at all in their writing. Do you?
No, it says that there's a kind of an obligation.
So it's kind of like an activist charter in the way that activism was. I mean, obviously, again, we have to look at this historically. I mean, activism in those days was things like writing to companies and finding out things, and
yes,
yeah,
and
which it was in the early days of
yeah,
yours as well, Ronnie.
and giving talks, and if someone's getting an article published in the Vegetarian Society's magazine, and there may be a number of articles like that. It was just that I came across one of them.
Yeah, there would have been. Yeah.
Then that's activism, and in fact, that's a brilliant form of activism, because a lot of people who are vegetarian for ethical reasons. Although the philosophy of vegetarianism isn't an ethical one. It just says you're vegetarian if you don't consume flesh, and that makes you a vegetarian. It's not like it's not a philosophy. It's a diet. But a lot of people that subscribe to the vegetarian diet, were doing it for ethical reasons. I did. I did because I thought it was wrong for animals to be killed for us to eat. I didn't know that animals were killed in connection with the dairy and egg industries. So once I found that out, then I stopped consuming.
Yeah, here's a question for Andy. In all your researches, did you see any of the very early pioneers getting letters in the press, as it were? I mean, you see them writing to ministers and that kind of stuff.
That's a good question. I can't think of anything specific off the top of my head where they've printed in the early years of like the vegan news, for example, or whatever, where they've said, "Hey, this
they
is a
haven't said,
letter
"Oh,
that's
we got
printed in
this in
this
the Daily Mail
newspaper."
or something." That's
Yeah,
right.
no,
Yeah.
nothing that comes to mind. No, and obviously they would have
Although
talked about
funny
it.
enough, Donald Watson
There's a
came.
couple of articles that talk about them speaking to various members of parliament and that kind of thing, but nothing that's like, here's a letter that was printed. No, not that I can remember.
Yeah, Donald Watson kind of almost explains that by saying that in the years after the war, and this goes back to, if you remember the Animals film, the trailer features a guy in the Animals film and he's going, all this stuff going on about humans and they're protesting about animals. What's the matter with them, kind of thing. And Watson said that in the years just after the war, then people are just not going to want to listen when you're making points about our fellow animals.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, people don't want to listen now.
No, but it makes sense, that point, doesn't it?
Of course, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It would have been, I think, difficult to get stuff published in newspapers. Although, of course, we don't know, because very very little survives from those times, does it?
Well,
It's not like now where everything's
It could be also that they didn't think to reproduce them.
Well, the other thing I was going to ask is, like, obviously there wouldn't have been like a photocopier then. How would they have kind of put that? Would they have had to like cut it out and stick it on?
No, they'd type it out.
What? You just mean retype the article as it was? Yeah, I suppose like that could have been done. Yeah, I suppose it depends how something could have been featured, but it might have happened and it just got a mention rather than a replication.
Yeah, be interesting. Yeah, that's a kind of thing to bear in mind when we're looking through the early stuff. It's quite
And obviously,
interesting.
there's been a few questions about certain things where people have said, "Oh, when you were looking through, is anything like this mentioned?" And I was like, off the top of my head, no. But obviously, I was never looking for that when I was going
No,
through. So
that's right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay. Well, here's something that might take us through to the end of the show. Any news about the RSPCA?
Ah, oh there was a couple of things because of course everyone's
A
jumping on
couple of
the
things.
RSPCA. Everyone's jumping on the RSPCA bandwagon. You had Joey Carbstrong, and then the Animal Justice Project with their campaign. Get the RSPCA to drop the assured label, and now you got surprise, surprise, you got Animal Rising jumping on it as well, like they jump on everything. And
I think you need to clarify some of these terms, Ronnie.
what
I
Animal
mean,
Right?
no, what is RSPCA assured and that kind of stuff?
Well, our RSPCA Assured is a scheme that the RSPCA award the assured label to farms that they regard as having high welfare standards, and to encourage people to buy.
Yeah, but it's a bit more than that, though, isn't it? It's more like they get farmers to sign up
They get them
to their standards and say, will
yeah,
you abide by these, right? And then they go yes, and so
yeah.
it's not that they
They
inspect.
can't really
They
check.
don't go to the farm and go, oh, you'll do. They've got criteria that they've got to
Oh, they've got
match.
they've got criteria that farmers have to sign up to. I mean, to what extent that's actually checked and monitored at the
Yeah,
beginning
well,
before they
that's
sign them
a
up, we don't
problem. Like
don't know.
how many staff have they got to do that, for example, right?
Yeah,
yeah,
that's right.
that's an argument that they could make in favour of themselves, that they don't need to rely on vegan activists to expose this footage. That actually, if they had more money or more staff, they would investigate and prosecute within house, so to speak.
Yeah, and of course, what's happened is there's been numerous investigations of these undercover investigations of these farms that have, and even I think like slaughtering processes and things as well have been included, that have got this RSPCA assured label, and the conclusion of this investigation is that there's kind of horrendous cruelty going on at these farms, and where these animals are going to slaughter. And so there's a campaign now. The RSPCA should drop its assured label, because that's kind of so encouraging people to buy animal products from these farms that are
Well, that bit could be true.
well, yes, but you see, there's kind of quite a lot to, and we've spoken about this before, and I think there's really quite a lot to be said about about the whole thing. I mean, basically, the very latest that's happened is Animal Rising were claiming that the RSPCA had dropped its meat recipes from its website as a result of them launching their campaign. I didn't know the RSPCA had meat recipes on their website. And it seems a bit strange to me that the RSPCA would have any recipes on the website. So it seems a little bit odd. Like a pound of beef, but only from an RSPCA assured farm, or something like that in the recipe, or whatever. I don't know. Is that what it was? But anyway, they Animal Rising have claimed that, unless they went on the RSPCA website and there were no recipes. So
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty pathetic and audacious.
I kind of don't. I don't know. I didn't know that they had recipes.
One, why how you'd even know that you were responsible for that, and two, why you thought that would make any difference.
Yeah,
whatsoever.
well,
that could just be an update on the website or anything.
They're saying that following the launch of their campaign, that's what happened, and claim it as victory. And people are desperate to claim all these victories, aren't they? And then the second thing was that they carried out an action where there was a portrait of King Charles, and they didn't actually damage the portrait, but they stuck something on the glass or something, didn't they?
King Charles, he's a dog, isn't he?
Yeah,
he's a spaniel. Yeah, he's a spaniel, isn't
I
he?
think it was like a vinyl sticker or something.
yeah, spaniel.
On that note, I thought it was really interesting that Animal Rising did a Zoom call last weekend where a number of people that I know went in there and asked some questions, and they promised that this year especially their campaigns had made a real effort to not just focus on food and address their claims making. So what did the speech bubble say from Wallace and Gromit?
I can't remember the speech bubble is, but
Something along the lines of, look at all that cruelty on RSPCA farms, Gromit, for cheese.
Yeah.
And it's like, so food-focused welfare language. They actually took all that criticism on board.
It's all about cruelty and the problem is that the fundamental wrong isn't cruelty. The fundamental wrong is these animals are being used, exploited in the first place, and killed at a fraction of their natural lifespan.
You know what a simpler message would have been? Less characters as well. Just say go vegan.
Yeah, well, you see, I think this is the problem that you see.
No money there.
What animal rising are kind of are calling for. I think probably Animal Justice Project as well in what they want is for the RSPCA to support transition to plant-based farming. In other words, to say we need to move away from animal agriculture, and
yeah, I mean, if anyone's in contact with Joey, here's a suggestion that's actually better than any of the things that you've done so far. Get the RSPCA to only offer assurance to plant-based products. Then it means something. Rather than shitting all over them or having a go at them for things that they don't do or claim to do or making up like lies about the things that they don't say, really, you could actually influence some change by saying just change how your assurance scheme works.
Oh yeah, somebody's put it in the thing. No cheese, Gromit. You ought to do the voice that way. No cheese, Gromit. Look at all this cruelty on RSPCA farms. So there's a problem there. Is that a lot of people are now suggesting that the RSPCA themselves have farms, which is not true. At least they claim not to be true. And also, Persona is raising a really interesting question for me, because they're saying pictures of RSPCA assured gas chambers next to the recipes. Now, an RSPCA assured gas chamber is not the same as an RSPCA approved gas chamber. Mm-hmm. And yet that's the kind of language change that has gone on a little bit. I don't think the RSPCA approve of the gas chambers for the reason that you said, Andy, which is the fact that they campaigned against them. And
they
now
absolutely did.
What they are doing again now, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Whereas groups like PETA campaigned for them, right? So all this kind of nuance and detail is lost in this argument. It's as though the RSPCA are absolutely delighted to have gas chambers. Well, they're not. They don't like them. It's just that the science, and it's called animal welfare science. They're a welfare group. They're not a rights group. This is RSPCA and also Animal Rising. The science says that the electrified tongs, which were the things that stunned the pigs, were used before the gas chambers, were crueler than the gas chambers.
Yeah, and that video that I stitched just the other day, which was made the early 2024, says that electric prong method is the most humane method now again. So, like, they all argue amongst themselves.
Yeah, well, yeah, the thing is, you mentioned Temple Grandin before, Andy. Grandin said that the tongs are better than the gas chambers, provided that they're used properly.
Correctly, yeah. That's
then
the
you're
same
down
with any
to
tool, right?
Yeah, the piecework problem gets in the way then, because people in slaughterhouses have to work fast. That's where you've got the problem with the tongs.
Yeah, and I think we mentioned this when we were talking about it last week or the week before. It's a similar issue with the gas chamber. If they're used properly and kept sort of like run efficiently and all those kind of things, then potentially they do what they're supposed to do. But the issue that comes in is human error, human lapse, and people want to go home early, so they start increasing the yield and all these kind of things. So until those things can be ruled out, all of these problems will always occur.
Yeah, but you see an overriding consideration is these campaigns are actually speciesist, and the reason is say the victims in these circumstances were not our fellow animals. Say they were humans. Say we were talking about an extermination camp, maybe something like the Nazis had, like Auschwitz. What would anyone think of a campaign that said, "Oh, please don't use the gas, because that gas causes, causes suffering to the inmates that you're wanting to kill.
Yeah.
Please use a more humane way of killing the thing, and we've exposed how cruel this gas is, and so we want you to
I think
end the
that
cruelty.
process happened, Ronnie.
Yeah, but you see, but we would look on that with horror, because what you need to, you don't say any of that. You say stop exterminating those people. Stop exterminating those humans. That's fundamentally
Yeah,
wrong.
yeah, but
Do it.
this
And
is the point, though, Ronnie. That the
yeah,
fact is, when the Nazis were debating what method to use, they were having those kind of conversation. What's best to do it in terms of speed, in terms of
yeah,
convenience, in terms of that. And so they ended up going to the German pest control company. That's where they got the gas from, right? Now, but the psychology of it is not that, oh, let's not do this, let's not do the Holocaust. It's kind of like, it's going to happen. So now what? That's where the RSPCA are.
yeah. But you see, these campaigns. You see the problem is that all of this, all of these campaigns are kind of diverting vegans away from the fundamental thing that I would say all vegans should be doing, and that is educating other people to become vegan,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because it isn't the cruelty that's the fundamental wrong. Cruelty is an additional aspect. It exacerbates things. But the fundamental wrong is that those animals are being used in the first place, and that they're being killed for food in the first place, when we can survive perfectly well without that. And that is the fundamental moral wrong. And
Yeah,
that's
and I
where the
mean,
focus should
obviously,
be.
if X amount more people went vegan, then the RSPCA's job would naturally shift to match.
Well, it would
It's
become.
not like they're saying, no, we have to stay this
Yeah,
way.
well,
I mean,
they'd
just to
respond
quote
to the
while we're on
culture.
this accusation
Yeah.
thing, there's two things that I do want to clear up. I'll happily play RSPCA Inspector for a moment. So there's no such thing as RSPCA approved in the way that's being advertised. RSPCA assured means, as Roger sort of explained at the beginning, think of it like your food hygiene certificate for a restaurant. There's criteria that are set. You have to have this, it has to look this way, it has to be kept this way, this, you have to have this. So as long as you meet that criteria and you pay your fee, you're in. That's it. There's no approval. They don't give you like, oh, don't worry, no matter what happens, we'll back you. If you bring something to the attention of the food hygiene or trading standards, they'll revoke that license and take action if needed, exactly the same as the RSPCA would. So they can only act if they see the information. So as I said earlier, they could very easily make the argument that, hang on, give us a little bit more money and some extra staff and we'll investigate these farms more often. So it's not beneficial in that sense or whatever. But also they don't take a cut. They don't get a percentage of this food sold or any of that stuff. These farms just pay like a yearly fee, one-off fee, which isn't a huge amount of money, which probably is on average not much more than what one rich donor gives them each month. And that's it. They just get to use the sticker.
We
It's
got a
really that
question here.
simple. The RSPCA aren't getting like 5% of meat sold. Like, that's all false. And I don't like the fact that vegans are misleading the public, trying to say that the RSPCA are misleading the public when they're not.
Yeah,
All of this
you'd
information
think
is
the
available on the
RSPCA
website.
love the idea of having to do this, but they're just saying, well, look, we're a welfare group, and then our job is to try and minimise the cruelty. And so, given the fact that you've got all these farms, and given the fact that you've got all these slaughterhouses, we'll try to bring about a system which will do just that, which is their remit. Now, Jim Harland, I believe, is a farmer. I'm not sure. How
Yeah.
many RSPCA call-outs were to farms last year compared to domestic animals? So I don't think it's a call-out to a farm. It's a regulation of farms in general we're talking about here with the assured system. But in terms of, I don't know, are you suggesting how many farmers call them out compared with what was going on
Perhaps he's talking about cruelty cases that the public report cruelty cases to dogs and cats, but how many?
and there's more of that than
Absolutely,
Well,
yeah.
well, it's just that the public don't really kind of have access to farms, and what would be considered to be cruelty on a farm, like hens kept in a battery cage or broilers crammed into a shed, the public wouldn't really kind of see that as cruelty in the same way that it would see someone kicking a dog or a cat, would they? And so they wouldn't alert the RSPCA to that, because that's just something that
Xcode says the RSPCA is a money-making business. So there's a lot of that going on.
Yeah, you see, the thing is that it doesn't help to kind of say things like that, because that kind of actually that isn't true. I mean, they kind of, I don't know how much their executives are paid, and it's probably too much. And they do, they obviously have to raise money to pay the people they employ. But in terms of like being a money-making business like some huge corporation or something, no, they're not. And that it isn't really true to say that. And all of that kind of talk isn't kind of actually, dealing with what the problem is. What the problem is here, the problem for me is this is a diversion. This is a diversion of the energy and the money and the time of vegans away from the fundamental thing that all vegans should be doing, and that's educating other people to become vegan. Because if you educate people to become vegan, you bypass all of this, because then people are opposed to those animals being used and exploited in the first place and being killed for food in the first place, right? So however those animals are kept is totally irrelevant. So the RSPCA assured scheme would become irrelevant because those animals...
It's like a twin track, I think you're saying. For example, when Andy was saying about if they had more staff, they could monitor things. Well, if the vegans are so bothered about animal welfare and they've found these terrible conditions, then they could just report it to the RSPCA and act as inspectors for them.
That's what I was waiting to bring up. So, like, for example, all of these groups like Animal Rising who have recently been and obviously exposed some of these assured farms, are they going in there, coming out with their footage and then releasing it on the internet? Or are they reporting it to the RSPCA first, giving them an allotted amount of time, and then when they're not acting, doing the expose? Because I don't think it's the latter. And in which case, well, what do you want them to do?
Well, that's the next question, though. The point is, say the vegan campaign wins, what then?
Well, excellent question, because no one's been able to answer that.
Well, I think there's kind of two aspects to the campaign. One is that they want the RSPCA to withdraw the assured label. Well, kind of how much difference that makes, I don't know, because someone who consumes animal products, right? They'll go to the supermarket to buy their animal products, and they'll think, well, I'm gonna try, and I'm concerned about the welfare of animals on farms, so I'm going to try and get select the RSPCA assured ones, right? But if there's no RSPCA assured ones there, that doesn't mean they go, all right, well, okay, I'm going to just buy vegan friendly stuff. They're going to buy other animal products, aren't they? Because that's what they've set out to do, and unless that person's educated that it's fundamentally wrong for those animals to be exploited and killed in the first place, they're still going to carry on like consuming animal products, whether they're RSPCA assured or not, aren't they? And
which is the RSPCA argument. Well, because they're going to carry on, we've got to do what we do.
Unless they're educated about veganism.
So it's like a separate issue then, isn't it?
Yeah. And but the other thing is, that would be helpful if the RSPCA to do it, because the other aspect of the demands of Animal Rising, and I think maybe Animal Justice Project as well, and the other people that are campaigning with regard to the RSPCA, is the RSPCA advocate for a transition to plant-based farming system. Right now, if the RSPCA were to advocate for that, brilliant. That would be great. What the chances of the RSPCA doing that are, I kind of don't know, and maybe the chances of that kind of aren't that great. That would be a much more positive thing.
Say that bit again, Ronnie. They want the RSPCA to do what?
To advocate for a plant-based farming system. to advocate for an end to animal agriculture. And if the RSPCA
Yeah,
were
but
to do that,
the way to achieve that is to turn the country vegan. The RSPCA have got no power to change the farming system any more than the public have.
I think what they're saying is, what they probably think is that the RSPCA is kind of supposedly highly thought of, and if the
Well,
RSPCA,
I think a big misconception here as well is that, and I've seen people say this, they think the RSPCA own these farms, right? So they think that the RSPCA can click their fingers and go from being animal farms to plant farms because the RSPCA own the farms. They don't.
yeah,
They've got no power. So it's just,
I think
I'm not
if
sure
the
why they don't just advocate for veganism. That's the way to get these farms to go to a plant-based
But
system.
also their
is to take away the
reputation
demand.
is welfare based, though, isn't it? Their
Yeah.
reputation, whatever it is based on the fact that they're an animal welfare group. If they start talking about other things, their reputation will nosedive, I would think.
Well, yeah, and the thing is, but on that exact note that you've just pointed out, that they're an animal welfare charity at the end of the day, they wouldn't be looking at this as saying, do we advocate for animal farming or plant-based farming? They just take that advocation away from animal farming and just refocus on other domesticated animals and wildlife. It wouldn't be because they, I mean, why would they have any need to back plant-based farming if it doesn't involve them?
yeah, I think
They're not like Red Tractor, are they? They're not a farming organisation. It's just part of their remit is farming. So actually, they would just lose a huge amount of time and effort that they have to spend doing things, and they just refocus somewhere else. I don't think they'd have any reason to look at plant-based farming. It's got nothing to do with them.
Yeah, the other thing I was concerned about, and I mentioned because we're kind of probably coming towards the end of our time soon, is that I noticed this publicity that Animal Rising gained through doing the thing to the King Charles painting thing. Right, I don't know how much publicity they got. I noticed there was an article on the BBC website, but it didn't include anything about really about it didn't include Animal Rising's demands for the RSPCA to advocate for plant-based farming. It didn't include that at all in that write-up. But I saw the press release that the Animal Rising issued to the media is on their website, and once again, there's nothing in there about encouraging members of the public to become vegan, or at least to stop consuming animal products. So they got this publicity from this action, and they wasted a golden opportunity to educate ordinary people not to consume animal products. So why haven't they included that as part of what they've said? Because it wouldn't have detracted at all from what else they were saying.
Well, you know why? Because they're based on system change, aren't they?
Yeah, but the problem is you don't get system change without individual change, as we've discussed many times.
Well, they seem to be giving it a go.
I still think it goes back to what I said 2 weeks ago as well. It's about shifting the blame onto someone else. If you make out that the RSPCA are the enemy, you have a target that you can turn the public on or whatever. Whereas when you're trying to go up against the public to make them go vegan, they're the target, so to speak, and that's not as comfortable for people. It's much easier to say, yeah, the problem in this situation is the RSPCA. If they did this, because then...
But you see, but you're kind of not really. It depends how you say it. People could say, well, and ordinary members of the public can help greatly with this by, ceasing to consume animal products. Mm-hmm. You can say it that way.
That's what I think. All of these campaigns, every single one, are a waste of time. What they should be doing is putting their time and effort into educating people.
No, I agree with you. No, I think that's the overriding problem is that we have limited resources in our movement. We've got a problem of of a huge lack of activists, and really this is why I'm always advocating for all vegans to become active in some way in spreading the vegan message, because we've got a limited number of activists, we've got limited resources. So what we need to do is to use those resources.
Well, yeah, and just very quickly, sorry to interrupt, going back to what we talked about earlier as well, of how it's always been very difficult to get vegan information printed in the paper or on the news. Now that we do get those opportunities, We
It's all
should be
about
making
cruelty.
the most of them. That
Yeah,
literally,
yeah,
that Wallace and Gromit thing that got loads of media attention worldwide
yeah.
simply said, go vegan. It's all it
A
needed to say.
wasted opportunity
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
educate
Yeah, totally.
ordinary members of the public, but they
Well,
wasted
the,
these
the press that
opportunities.
I've seen is more about what they did rather than what they want.
100%
Yeah,
right. Rather
yeah,
than that's
yeah.
why the message needed to be as simple as go vegan, because you knew that was always going to be the case, where they'd attack the protesters or they'd attack the
Well,
act rather
when
than
they did
focusing on what
get
was
to
said.
that kind of thing, if any of the news got to that, then it's obviously going to be cruelty based because that's the
The
word
message
that
in
they've
there,
chosen
exactly.
to
Yeah.
use.
Yeah, and it goes back to what we've said lots of times. Where do the media or others get their idea of what veganism is? From what we tell them. So, as
It's,
far as they're concerned, we're a welfare movement that's about food. That's what the message says.
Yeah, the only problem with that, Andy, is that they might not be wrong. We might be. It's not as though we're getting the messaging wrong. It's the fact that they're getting the messaging right because that's who they are.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a huge problem. Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I do think, I mean, it's not just these opportunities where we're talking about, like, activism in that sense, where they're talking artwork or that sort of thing. Even the opportunities where people go on, like Piers Morgan's show, they're not taken as they should be. The language is really sloppy. We reduce things down to a diet or down to welfare or any of these things. And so we're not challenging that narrative that we are just a welfare movement that's focused on food. We're cementing it.
yeah, I think
It makes more people listen to one of those interviews between someone and Piers than any ever going to listen to us.
the argument for veganism, or at least for people not consuming animal products, is hugely simple, right? We don't need to for our survival or well-being. So why are we doing it? It must be morally wrong to exploit and kill all these animals for food when we don't need to do it. End of argument. It's simple, but no one says it like that. It gets complicated with all this cruelty talk. No.
Yeah, I know. Well, we know deep down that just falls into the realms of marketing, advertising, and money.
Well, yeah, I think there's
Much easier message
lot
to
more.
sell.
There's a lot more money to be made.
Absolutely, you can sell that message. You can bring out an entire industry that looks to become sort of like an interim between those two ideas and all those things. Yeah, absolutely. Abolition takes those industries away. Welfare introduces new ones.
Yeah, it's very simple. You don't need, to say what I do. You see, when I became vegan in '72, it wasn't anything. I'd become vegetarian 2.5 years earlier, and the reason I went vegetarian was because because animals were being killed for food, and I came to realise that wasn't necessary, and so I thought, well, it's not necessary. I can live perfectly well without that, so therefore it must be wrong to do it, and that's why I stopped. I didn't know anything about the conditions those animals were kept in. I didn't know anything about the slaughter methods that were used on them. It was just the fact that they were being exploited and they were being killed, and that's what caused me to be vegetarian. And then when I found out that that the about the killing of animals caused by the dairy industry and the killing of them caused by the egg industry, that's when I went vegan. It was nothing to do with cruelty. It was nothing to do with the conditions they were kept in or how they were killed, right? And that's and that is a very, very simple concept, and that's what we need. That's what we need to get back to. Yeah, so I've got nothing against people talking about cruelty, but they need to talk primarily about the fundamental wrong, which is the exploitation and the killing, and then talk about that. And in addition to that, in many cases, there's this cruelty as well.
Yeah,
that's how it should be.
No, I would totally agree with everything you just said. And I think that's a good note to call it a night on, unless you've got anything to add, Roger.
No, I mean, it's a multi-layered thing. I mean, we could talk for another half an hour about this because there's all kind of things, the business angle that we just kind of alluded to, and all the misinformation about the RSPCA. I mean, like Ronnie was saying, the fundamental wrong is that they've made me into an RSPCA defender which is
Yeah, right.
ludicrous.
It's some of the people from my old dog rescue days because have heard me tonight, like sticking up for the RSPCA.
I know, yeah. It's so bizarre, isn't it?
But yeah, it's because we got to tell the truth. The facts are the facts. I know that it would be much easier for our cause if they were, as was being said, but they're not, I'm afraid. And so it's misinformation.
Right. Well.
Yeah. Okay.
And what's really interesting is that when Animal Rising were Animal Rebellion, one of their prime aspects of their philosophy was tell the truth.
Yeah.
And so many times they kind of haven't.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree with you there. Yeah, I mean they're talking about the big secret that the RSPCA need to tell the truth about. Well, it's on their website. It has been for a number of years. It's you that are misleading people, I'm afraid, and I hate to say it, but that's the real truth.
Yeah, but I mean, speaking to all the vegans that are listening to that,
Okay, according to a comment, Ronnie, you sound like David Attenborough.
Do I? Well, I'm almost as old as David Attenborough, so that's perhaps one of the reasons.
You'll have to send him some sort of invoice for a share of all your narration.
Yeah, I'll have to say, come on, David, you're using my voice on your narration.
Exactly, yeah.
I mean, there are worse people to sound like than David Attenborough, aren't there, I suppose, to be quite honest.
Absolutely, yeah.
Except he might send an invoice to Still Alive for you, Ronnie.
Yeah, you might say you're impersonating me.
Can you not invite him on and get him to go vegan?
I want royalties. Well, if anyone cares about, what they might call wildlife, what we prefer to call free living beings, right? Anyone cares about them, and he cares passionately about those animals, right? The best way of protecting them is to go vegan, because the biggest threat to the natural world and those animals that inhabit it is animal farming, and also if you're talking about the ocean, creatures in the ocean, it's fishing, a fishing industry.
Yeah,
that's the primary thing to do. That's the number one. Those are the number one causes of the extinction of animals living in the natural world. So if you care about them, that's the first thing to do.
No, it's RSPCA assured labels.
Yeah.
Which is my last word for tonight.
Yes. Well, anyway, hopefully we'll all be back next Wednesday. Next Wednesday evening for another thrilling episode, won't we?
Yeah, absolutely. We might actually get to 1950.
Yeah. This is. I don't have a year.
It'll be 4 weeks next week, and we'd have done 6 years. So yeah, I think they are going to go on for a little while.
Yes, yeah, but it's interesting. It's interesting.
Absolutely, yeah, totally.
Yeah, it's ironic because we're saying, oh, it was dead slow back then.
yeah, we're not being much quicker.
It might speed up as we progress in time, I think.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, on that note, thanks so much everyone for joining, and we'll be back same time next week, 9 o'clock.
Okay, see you next week.
Bye everyone. Thanks for tuning in.
Bye.